Hello and welcome to a Glastonbury Romance. Seated in his shed, sharpening a faggot of sticks for the supper of his young peas, crouched the owner of Backwarrior Hut, a very old man called Abel Twig. No sooner did Jackie catch sight of Mr. Twig than he caused his Lieutenant Nellie to proclaim a halt. It was not difficult to obtain obedience on this command, so exhausted was the main body of the alley gang, and Bert, slipping like a sack of flour from the back of Sis, was soon propped up against the iron railings, through which his round eyes stared in wonder at the map of North and South America. The small hands of Jackie, Nellie, and Sis clung in a row to the topmost railing of Mr. Twig's sole line of defense, while the hatless heads of Jackie, Nellie, and Sis looked down in an unabashed curiosity upon the interior of Mr. Twig's shed. "Hello!" cried Jackie in a shrill voice. "Hello, number one!" In every town of the size of Glastonbury, there are produced by great creative nature certain laughing-stocks, or butts of derision, for the amusement of the rabble. Old Jones of the antiquity shop, now in the local hospital, and old Twig, now before us in his shed, were the butts of Glastonbury. They were bosom cronies, these two old men, and not a child in the poorer district but had not at one time or other followed these queer ones down the streets mocking and shouting. They were always called number one and number two, and so widely spread were these nicknames that in some of the bewildered heads of the contemporaries of young Bert, the two great excretory functions of our poor animal organism, so prominent in children's lives, were confusedly associated with these venerable old persons. "Hello, number one," repeated Jackie. "Number two would be an hospital," echoed Nellie. "Bert wants a glass of water, Bert do," added Sis in a less combative voice. "What did I tell ye, eh? What did I tell ye young scan-mooches? I telled ye yesternight I'll get a bumbugle at ye if ye come again. Hi there, good dog, hi there. Hi there, Bumble Boggle, hi, Bung Boggle. Ye girt sleepy beasts, come and eat up these three impudents." Captain Jackie did not budge. Lieutenant Nellie did not flinch. It is impossible, however, to conceal the fact that after this alarming invocation, there were only 5 little hands clutching the railings. Sis, concerned for Bert, had thrown one arm around her small brother's neck. Bert himself, however, to the honor of the alley gang, replied to the challenge in a momentous sentence. "I ain't afraid of no fancy dogs, I ain't. "Bert wants a glass of water, number one, Bert do," repeated Sis in a sing-song monotone. "Oh, he does he?" growled old Twig. "I'll water him, I'll fork him, I'll ferret him, oh, he does he?" Talking to himself all the time in the manner of a ferocious ogre, old Twig got up and retired into the square object, which were by the name of Backwarrior Hut. He returned almost immediately with a tin cup full of water, which he handed to Bert between the railings, not relinquishing it himself, but tilting it up, while the child drank long and deep. No sooner had the old man returned to his shed and his task of whittling his pea-sticks, than Nellie lifted up her high-pitched voice. "Tell us some more about the funny men who lived in Lake Village in your granddad's time." Muttering and chuckling, the old man moved up the railing and leaning over tried to lift Bert across. But Bert, far too heavy for him, was already pushing himself under the lowest bar. The 3 older children were now scrambling over the top of the railings, and in about 3 minutes after their first "hello," they were all seated at old Twig's feet in the front of his shed, listening spellbound to what he was saying. "'Twould be in my own field," he began. "This here Lake Village has all had their rights. Granddad sold 'em to Lawyer Beers, father and Lawyer Beers, father sold 'em to Mr. Crow up at Elms, and Mr. Crow, they say, is going to turn sheep out and make it a visitor's field. He've bought one party here already this season, and so have Mr. Barter. Other folks say he be going to turn this whole field into one of them landing for airboats. If this be true, 'twould be terrible disturbing for them old ghosties in Lake Village." "Have you ever seed one of them funny men's ghosties, Mr. Twig?" interrupted Sis. "Don't interrupt, Sis," cried Nellie. "Number one ain't begun his story yet. His story ain't about Mr. Crow." It ain't about any of the like of us," echoed Captain Jackie, taking the cue from his lieutenant. 'Tis about the old men themselves. Be I telling ye there tell of ye telling this here tale? Said Abel Twig. It dawned upon him rather sadly that his listeners envisioned the ancient heroes of Lake Village as so many feeble replicas of number one. Bert, be a good boy, Bert B, ejaculated irrelevantly the owner of that name. When I tell this here tale to Bum-Doggle, said Mr. Twig, Bum-Boggle do prick his girt ears and say nothink. There was a complete silence among the alley gang by this, and old Twig went on. 'Twas years and years before King Arthur that they ancient British funny men living in Lake Village. They funny men were terrible feared of beasties in these days, beasties as big as my house. Your house being as big as my mummy's be, interrupted Jackie. Number one's houses be a very nice house, threw in Sis, evidently feeling for a second as if Mr. Twig were a larger edition of Bert. Were it afore your granddad sold thick field and that ancient Britons lived in that field reed houses? Nellie looked with astonishment at her gallant captain when he made this unintelligent remark. She began to recognize, as many romantic young women have been forced to do before, that high military achievement is comparable with very crude historical perspective. But Mr. Twig was rather pleased at otherwise at the reference to his granddaughter's hasty disposal of landed property. 'Twere a little while afore poor old granddad's days, he said, that they ancient British lived. Bert's got pins and needles, said Sis. He be waggling wit his foot. Sit right a cock on number one's knee, rejoined old Twig, placing the little boy upon one of his thin legs. Seated solemn and erect, without moving an eyelid, Bert contemplated the countenance of his host while Sis began rubbing the child's instep. A faint smile flickered over the little boy's face. Bert be peeing his trousies, cried Sis with concern. No, I bain't, retorted the infant indignantly. Why did you look like that then? Argued his sister. The child got very red and said nothing. You be, the girl reiterated. I bain't, shrilled the youngster, and driven by the injustice of the words to break his own rule of politeness. He be like Guy Fawkes, he brought out, while the corners of his mouth went down. And it was an unusual event for Bert to smile. It was no less than an historic event for him to show signs of tears. Sis lifted him from the old man's knee, took him upon her own little lap, and hugged him against her sturdy frame. There's one of these funny men in them times, went on the old man hurriedly, who killed a girt beastie with a flint arrow. Thick beasties was called Giant What's-his-name, on account of his name being so hard to say. But when the funny man killed it, he took off all his skin and made a fire in his sister, who was his wife too, cooked thick girt beastie. Bert lifted up his head at this exciting point. Sis be Bert's wife, he remarked with intense gravity. Sis slapped him sharply and turned reproachfully to Mr. Twig. Those times bain't our times, she protested. I wish I lived in those times, cried Nellie with flashing eyes. I'd have helped Jackie to shoot them girt beast. I'd have carried a bundle of them flinties. My granddad's field, what he sold to old Lawyer Beer, bain't the only field he had. Yen field over this dike where he's in, and be mine today. Into this course of boasting, it was natural enough that Captain Jackie should fling his contribution. When Mr. Barter do fly from the here Lake Village, 'twon't be with any ghostie, 'twill be with I. The whole robbery band regarded their leader with wondering awe. I'll be there to wave to ye, cried Nellie, and I'll throw summat at ye, maybe for luck. Will you fly above your mother's chimney, Jackie? Inquired Sis. Sis be Bert's airship, remarked the wide-eyed infant, glancing obstinately at his sister in full expectation of being slapped again. But it was old Twig, not Sis, who broke up this happy colloquy. He suddenly clapped his hands at his head and beat on his hard skull. Oh, the duck-a-duck, he cried. Incense! Out foolishness! And still beating his old pate, he set himself to run with shambling gait into a back-wire hut and up the single flight of stairs. Be off! Be off! Be off! Quick! Quick! If you love old Twig at the price of a bright penny, be off. Out of here. Afore they come. These remarks were addressed to the robber band from the upper window of Backware Hut, out of which the old man, withered neck and grizzled head protruded. It was clear that Captain Jackie was seized with panic. The bravest are subject to such emotions once or twice in their lives. Forgetting entirely about his little army, he scrambled at top speed over the railings and bolted up the road in the opposite direction from the town. It was then that the heart of the band's fiery lieutenant was torn in two. For while both fear and love urged him to follow Jackie, an impulse in her girl's breast, stronger than fear and love, constrained her to help Sis get Bert out of the shed and over the railings. Then, however, she waited not a second, but followed her lord on flying feet. Poor Sis, the stolid little lass, suffered a most evil moment, as under the eyes of the frantic old man, leaning out of the window, she tried in vain to get the panic-stricken Bert to mount upon her back. Desperately, she propped him up above the lower bar at the railings and, turning around, clutched wildly at his legs. Each time she seized his legs, he toppled back against the railings. In vain she lost her temper. In vain she slapped him. The panic of Jackie and Nellie, the old man's frightened voice out of the window, her own unusual agitation, quite broke down the philosophy of Bert. The little boy, for the first time since he was 2 years old, burst into a howl of desolate crying. Two events now occurred simultaneously while Sis, on her knees by the blubbering child, soothed him with words and caresses. The old man withdrew from the window, stumbled downstairs, and rushed into the road. At the same moment, two extremely neat young ladies, both in elegant black, one with a blue ribbon upon her neck and the other with a pink ribbon, advanced side by side from the direction of the town, arriving at Mr. Twig's gate. They surveyed the sobbing Bert, who was making up for the rarity of his departure from philosophic calm by his difficulty in regaining it with aloof distaste. This was the sort of thing that both Louis and Lily Rogers, for such they were, had become handmaidens to escape. The mere sight of Sis and Bert brought back vividly to their mind their own early experiences. They edged away from the little girl and the little boy, and one of them began fumbling rather nervously with the dilapidated latch of the still more dilapidated gate. This gate had not, as a matter of fact, been open for years, perhaps not since the death of Mr. Twig's granddad, and it became apparent to Louis, for in Miss Drew's absence no human creature addressed her as, or thought of her as Rogers, that whatever entrance or exit Uncle Abel may have possessed, this rusty gate was not it. Meanwhile, Uncle Abel himself, full of the most obsequious apologies, had appeared upon the scene, and was now hovering like the bewildered physician at Dunsinane between the mental trouble of one claimant of his attention and the physical impasse of the other. "'Tis here, my dears, 'tis here I step over," he cried, waving to his dainty nieces to follow him and hurriedly along the edge of his domain till he reached the place where the top rail was non-existent. "Here's a place, my precious ducks, 'tis only a lift your pretty skirts a trifle so's not to get rust on 'em. 'Tis here, my sweethearts. Up she goes, and over the hurdle. Here, 'tis here I go in and out." But the two elegant creatures, for they were really good-hearted girls, had both of them by this time drifted up to where Sis knelt by the prostrate Bert. The philosopher's sobs were over, but his deep shame remained, and this emotion, as often happens with wise men who have been unwise, displayed itself in irrational anger towards his nearest and dearest. Bert, lying on his face in the grass, kicked obstreperously every time Sis touched him. Matters were further complicated at this moment by the return of Jackie and Nellie. Nellie in a moment jerked Bert upon his feet, and once in a particular position, the child's interest in the surprising scene around him made him forget his disgrace. And we'll stop there for today. Leave me a comment, especially if you have any idea what's going on. I guess these scamps are bothering some old man and his young nieces that are maybe twins are visiting him. But until next time, I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.